Welcome everyone to Forgiving Cultural Supremacy. For those who are tired and burned out by oppression, my name is Inabel Uytiepo, and if you could move to slide 2, I'm calling in from the UP lands. Sorry. And I'm a settler from an immigrant family of Filipino and Chinese ancestry. So I'm a settler here on UP lands where there are no known survivors of UP due to the genocide of the UP of the missionaries. And so the indigenous stewards are the survivors of the San Juan Bautista and Santa Cruz missions, and the tribal band are not federally recognized, but they're known as the Amamutsen tribal band. And so you can learn more about them on the link in the slide. And I also want to name that we are able to gather online like this because of violence, because of the technologies that have been created due to the extraction of elements in the earth at the expense of human and non-human families. And so recognizing that we're together on sacred time and recognizing the earth as a living being, not as a property or a resource, and also naming that we are all relatives. So thank you for gathering. You can share the next slide. So today, the links are in the chat, and the link to the slides are in the chat. And I'll be giving I'll share a little bit about myself, a teaching on somatic forgiveness in regards to cultural supremacy, a little bit of storytelling, and then I'll invite folks to engage in an inquiry practice. And skipping to slide 6. So on this slide, there's a little bit about me and my background, but I didn't want to spend a lot of time talking about it. So if you wanted to look on that slide, you could read a little bit more about me. But some of the things that I think that are relevant today is that I have a background of doing anti-racist work, and I wanted to share a bit about my practice with forgiveness that I've engaged in over the last dozen years or so. And so I named some of my teachers on this slide. One of my main teachers is Eileen Barker, who's a mediator who studied forgiveness pretty extensively and gives like lectures around the world. But from my perspective, the way that I moved with it as a body worker and as healing arts practitioner was to incorporate the body in relationship to forgiveness work, so that it's not just in like a thought process, but also a somatic embodied practice. And so I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with burnout. So if you could go to the next slide. So what I found was in my anti-racism work, I was becoming really exhausted by the society that I'm in. So I'm here on Turtle Island, and there's a lot of polarization between races, or and so in my anti-racist work, I found it more and more difficult to want to work with people that were racialized white, and I was I was experiencing a lot of burnout in the activism that I was engaging in. And um, because of the systemic oppression that is experienced here on Turtle Island, both for Indigenous people and racialized Black folks and people of color, it becomes really exhausting to just like function day to day, um, especially if you have a critical lens on the experiences of being here. And so as I was engaging in activism, I found that the burnout became really strong, and I no longer wanted to work with people that were racialized white. And so I list these elements of burnout because sometimes we think of burnout as just being um, working working too much, but it's also the experience of lack of control, of having values conflicts with folks that we're either having to work with in maybe our occupations where we're trying to, make a living, or in community, and experiencing a lack of reciprocation, whether that's like money or access, um, racial justice issues, social justice issues, and then leading to a breakdown and being able to connect with people and work with people in community, including other activists, right? Like sometimes um, working with other activists, even though we have the same goals, it the disillusionment becomes really strong, and there's like a huge breakdown, and it's difficult to keep moving forward. And what I was finding was working not only with other activists of color, especially this idea of working with um, white, racialized white people that are like allies, it became increasingly more painful to work um, with folks that I wasn't perceiving them as being able to understand the struggle, right? It just became really painful. And so one of the things that um, I was exploring was this practice of forgiveness. And so I was applying forgiveness work in my personal life with my mother, with so I was married twice, and one of my um spouse was was like a detective. So they were um a cop that was a detective for a um a police force that was out of the country. And when I was in their country, they assaulted me and said, "What are you going to do? Are you going to call a cop?" And so um, I couldn't engage in like asking for protection from the police because that person was a police officer. And so it led to this really direct experience of police brutality and racial harm in a country where I wasn't from. And so personally, it led to this distrust in people of white supremacist power. And so the reason why I talk about it being cultural supremacy is because it's not always white supremacy. Sometimes it's different layers of cultural supremacy. And so my experience was I was having exhaustion of working with white activists or non-activists, just like white people in general. And so I wanted to apply my experience of forgiveness to my anti-racist work. And so what I did to do that, let's see here, was I explored how can I apply forgiveness work to my anti-racism work. And so my mentor said, well, who is it that you're experiencing this resentment with? And so if you can move to the next slide, Andre. So resentment can also be known as drinking poison and hoping someone else will die. And so because it was becoming increasingly difficult to work with white folks doing anti-racism work, I knew that I was drinking the poison of resentment towards white people, particularly white women, and not so much hoping that they would die, but it was like the resentment was making it so that I was pushing them away, even though they were wanting to engage as allies. And so how I began to work on it was I started to take specific incidents with each white person that I had experienced either an oppressive incident or I had like assumptions about an action that was made towards me, and I was coloring it all as, oh, white people are doing this. So I started to break it down and look at very specific incidents and then began to apply forgiveness to that work. And that made something really general into something more specific that gave me the ability to address the burnout. And so I wanted to share a story. And this story is unique in that it's not a story of mine from this lifetime. So I actually did a past life or alternate life journey. And so I invite you to listen to this story with your whole body and see if any parts of it resonate for you and if it reminds you of anything in your life. And so it begins with feeling my body and recognizing that I'm not in a female body. I recognize that I'm a man and that I'm a soldier and that I've been fighting a war for a really long time. And I land on this island and I realize that I need to find my father. So I run through the village looking for my father because I know that the Japanese are bombing my father's village. And so I run through the fire and this village that has been completely destroyed. And I find my father's home. And I can feel that my father is in there. And somebody walks by and says, "Your father refused to leave the house." And the house is on fire. And I realize that my father has been burned alive. And so my body is filled with rage and anger and wanting to retaliate against the Japanese. And a vision comes to me, and it is my mother of that life. And she says to me, and she had died previously. So this is a vision of my mother who had died. And she comes to me and she says, "Do not retaliate. Weave a new tapestry." So she's begging me not to seek revenge and not to avenge my father who has been burned alive in his home by these Japanese soldiers. And this is taking place in the Philippines. And then I fast forward in that life, and my spirit has moved on to do anti-racism work with Black soldiers that refuse to fight against the people of that land. And so this is a story of a completely separate life, and yet in this life I have continued to seek ways to work with anti-racism. And so the invitation, if you could move to slide 10. 10, sorry. The one that says
Wait.
It's
Sorry.
the
Yeah.
one that says forgiveness at the top. Yeah.
Sorry. I cannot see the numbers
Oh, and the
in
one
the
that
screen.
it's okay. It says go back. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Thanks.
So I can talk about forgiveness for a really long time, but I really like this quote. Forgiveness is probably the most important self-esteem building process anyone can undertake. Forgiveness is an internal response to the fact that we cannot, under any circumstances, change the past. The only things we can change are our thoughts about the past. Forgiveness happens when we stop wishing for a better past and understand that we are carrying hatred, anger, and resentment within us. And so my alternate life, there was nothing that I could do to bring back my father from being burned alive in that village. And the only thing I could do was to change my response to that lived reality. And to know that I was carrying hatred and anger and resentment towards the Japanese soldiers that killed my father alive. And so the reason why I named this cultural supremacy, because there are no white people in this story, right? This alternate life was actually the Japanese that were racially discriminating against my father. And in fact, in this life, my grandfather, who's Chinese, was being discriminated um, by Japanese soldiers because he was Chinese. And so he had to go into hiding because of his Chinese ancestry and because of his supposed ability to read Japanese characters. I don't actually know if he could read and write. I believe he could read and write in Chinese, but maybe he was one generation out. So this my family history of cultural supremacy is between multiple Asian ancestries. And so the work of my family is about looking at the cultural supremacy that oppressed my grandfather to go into hiding, who eventually lost all of his businesses to the Japanese during World War II. And then eventually, the Americans came to the Philippines, and then there was another type of cultural oppression of forcing English and American education on the Philippines. And so cultural supremacy is rampant throughout all countries, right? Like depending on who who's in positions of power. And so my mother of a different life was imploring me and begging me not to retaliate on behalf of my father being burned alive. And so I still feel that now. Like I've done the forgiveness work around the white folks that I've, been in spaces of, activism. I was engaged in a lot of animal rights activism, actually, where I was experiencing this resentment towards white women. And so, in order to address that resentment that was like drinking poison and hoping someone else will die or hoping someone else will suffer, was and it was hindering my ability to show up in my life in a way that wasn't filled with that poison and that sense of like internalized uh, oppression that is being perpetuated. So, my invitation to folks is to engage in an inquiry practice and then um, I'll guide a another practice, but to begin with, to do a writing practice. So I'm putting the link in the chat for the reflection questions, and you can select one of the one of the rows to write your reflections so that we can see. So this is like a collective experience where we can see each other's answers without putting our names in it. So the first question is, what is a part of you that experiences oppression?
You want me to share this, or you prefer the presentation?
Uh, we can share the presentation, just the questions. And then those that are participating live can see each other's. Yeah, there we go. The inquiry part, thank you. And then the second question is, imagine a specific incident in detail, an easier one. So an experience of oppression, but maybe not the most difficult thing, right? And then how does that feel in your body and your heart? And the next question will be, what have the harmful impacts been? And I went over some in burnout on slide 7. And then the final question is, who would you be if you were free of these impacts? So I wanted to, obviously we can't go into a long process right now. And that's why I was saying we could pick an easier one. Obviously, it's layered, right? And there's so many ways that we are impacted. I wanted to go over the ways that, and I wanted you to imagine this as you think of the incident that you thought of. What the way that we would move through a path of forgiveness is to really take the time to be with that incident and be with the whole story of that particular incident, and allowing all the feelings of the heart and the mind and the body to arise. Because what happens is we skip, it's easy to skip all of those feelings because there's a inclination to feel that it'll last forever because the impact feels so immense. And then the next part would be to move through how and when it happened and where it gets stuck in the body and where are the contractions and how does it move through our body. And then to find the gifts and the transformations that arose due to those experiences. This can be one of the more challenging parts of it because it's easier said than done, right? To find the gift. And then the next step would be to develop a wish to forgive, or at least a curiosity to forgive, and then engage in that feeling of forgiveness for ourself and the other who that we are our oppressor. And then to recommit oneself to that commitment of acknowledging their participation, and then engaging in a final ritual of letting go that we would create together. And so, because we can't go through all of that today, I wanted to give you just a little taste of what that process would look like. And so thinking of that specific incident, the more specific you can get, the better, because if it's too general, then we can't um, transform it. So, for example, when I was having a lot of difficulty working with um, white women, and I say white women specifically because um, it needed to be specific enough where I could identify specific incidents. And so I literally had to trace back every single incident that I could remember. Obviously, I can't remember all the incidents that my ancestors have experienced, but one by one, I began to trace individual incidents. And so, if we can take a very specific incident, however small we think it is, then we can do the work to release it. And one of the ways we can begin to do that is to think, when did this incident happen? And so the invitation now is to visualize when the very specific incident happened, how old we were. So you can put it on slide 12, Andre, or the next slide.
This
Visualize.
one? Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Yes, thank you. So visualizing one specific incident where you were and who was there, what was happening in that space. And choosing a fairly simple one, because I don't want to leave you unsupported, but something that is manageable for right now. And thinking of how old you were, where you were, the time of day. And then remembering that that incident happened in that moment. And really concentrating your imagination into placing that incident in its time. So perhaps we had an incident that happened while we were in school, or when we were out in public and we had an encounter, but remembering that it happened at that specific time. And then sort of like imagining like a time capsule, allowing that time capsule to completely enfold that incident. And then leaving that incident there during that time period. And then zooming out and, like an observer from space, imagining that incident is left on that time period. And then bringing yourself back to this moment right here, right now. Like like you're transporting yourself in time, but you're leaving that incident there in the past. And then remembering you are here right now, and that incident happened then. And countless things have happened between now and then. And somehow we are not focused on all those other incidents of ordinary experience, yet somehow that particular incident stood out. But through this like time travel, we bring that incident back to that time and leave it there. And travel all the way back to the present moment. And as the mind wants to return to being attached to that incident, remembering that it happened when it happened, then returning your attention back to the present moment. And having left that incident there, feeling your own body right here, right now. And how does it feel to have released that incident to the time period where it came from, no longer carrying it within our physical body or energetic body, and being present to ourselves right here, right now. And allowing that feeling of letting go to ripple out to all other aspects of ourselves, and releasing ourselves from the impact of that incident. And then allowing your breath and your attention to return to this body right here, right now. And allowing your breath to expand into the present moment. Bringing your breath into your feet, into your fingertips. And returning to the present. And when you're ready, coming back to that same document, and at the bottom of the document, you can share what you noticed. Oops. And anything that you're wondering about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever you prefer.
Okay. Does anyone want to share what they noticed? Or any questions or reflections to the group?
It was really awesome for me. I do a lot of visualization and stuff, so it was pretty easy to see myself leaving that behind. And before you gave the instruction to kind of like see yourself in space, I was just walking away from it, and even just turning my back on it and walking away from it felt very liberating. So that was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
For me, it was challenging. I mean, there was a memory that just came right away and offered itself, and it was a long time ago. Yeah, it felt like it fit the criteria of what you were saying, but it was still really activating for me. And I think I wasn't ready to move on to putting it like in a capsule. I was like, wait, this is too fast. Like all the feelings are so like present. And so one thing that it made me wonder about was the role of grief. And like, I'm the person that a lot of times I take longer to process things than other people. And also, and I'm like, well, I've accepted that about myself to some degree or another. So yeah, I was just like longing to have a space for more time because I would love to be able to do that, but it wasn't happening for me. I'm like, oh, it can't fit in the bottle. I'm trying to put it in. So yeah, I felt like I was needing like a more in-depth like being with those feelings and being able to like grieve them. And I think also part of the reason is shame is like always with me and I can't, yeah, I think one reason it takes so long is because there's always a part that's just like, you shouldn't, this is not a big deal. You shouldn't feel this way. And so, yeah, part of me was like, okay, I want this more expansive container, not like just like wondering who, is there someone that I'm like, maybe I can email Inabel, like, who can help me? But then I'm like, no one's going to take it seriously. It's just so dumb. So, yeah, I was just noticing all of that.
Yeah, thank you for naming all of that. And yeah, it's hard to kind of fit that perfect request of something that's a little bit easier, that's oppressive but not too hard. But I did mention that when we do a longer process with this, that is the part that is the most challenging, is staying with our feelings and that we experience in our heart and our mind and our body. And we do need to take that time and really allow it to come up when, when we're doing a longer process with somatic forgiveness. Um, uh, and so I wanted to say that when we are critiquing ourselves and saying, "Oh, this is not a big deal. This is just like this small thing." It's surprising how much something that sticks with us that seems so petty has so many layers underneath. So many layers. Like I'm thinking of um another person that I worked with that, mentioned something about, their hair, and we know like hair is such a big thing, right? But it's like in the moment we're thinking, oh, I should just get over this. I shouldn't, be focused on this, but there's the layers underneath. And so thank you for being vulnerable and naming that. It seems petty, but it's taking up a lot of space for a reason. Yeah. Um, Yuda, forgive me if I pronounced your name wrong.
No, you got it perfectly right. And I just wanted to add to that, that I do think some of the reason why it was relatively easy for me is because I have written about and talked about that experience. I've written about it twice, once very recently, And I've talked about it a couple of times. And so I have, you know, grieved. I don't call any of my emotions small. They're all, part of my guidance system. So yeah, I definitely have, it was easier for me because I have done a lot of the grief work.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I appreciate everyone's participation and willingness to explore forgiving cultural supremacy. I'll hang out for another 10 minutes or so if folks still have thoughts or questions, but I know there's other activities happening today, so if folks wanted to leave at clock time and had other things to go to, please feel free. But yeah, this work has definitely led me to be able to begin to work with white people again, you know, um, and to just really have a deeper compassion for myself and for others so that I'm able to navigate the moment that we're in the world, right, with polycrisis and metacrisis. Um, we're really needing to find ways to step back from the things that keep us apart from each other and unable to work together. And so, this has been a really powerful way for me to be able to, um, like, carefully and mindfully take care of my inner work that I need to tend to so that I'm able to show up in the world and do the hard things like show up for my family and community and work with people that I may or may not have anything in common with, but it like I'll give a very specific example. I live in a forest where we have wildfires, and when the fires come, right, it's like we all of the other things are set aside and we're just like trying to help each other to survive the moment. So it's like how do I find that inner strength to be able to show up to survive in this rapidly changing world of yeah, meta polycrisis. So I wanted to share this with everyone. Thank you so much.